Good afternoon, South Holland. Welcome to Lunch with the Librarian. Now I'm looking in the right camera. Welcome to Lunch with the Librarian, although today it's not lunch. It's kind of a treat. I am feeling fantastic after having watched the first woman vice president be inaugurated yesterday, and I'm kind of riding that high, and I want to do something kind of special and a little sweet that's, it's not lunch. It could be breakfast, not the best breakfast choice, but sometimes you gotta live a little. Raise your hand if you love Pop-Tarts, or like toaster strudel, love them. Today we're making our own from scratch. And I don't know why I keep on looking at the wrong camera. It's actually not as hard as you think. We're not making the crust or the dough from scratch. I'm going to show you what we're going to use in just a second. This is super easy and it's super adaptable. So let me swing the camera around to my workspace and we can get going. As always, sorry about that. As always, I'll link the recipe in the description of the I'll link the recipe to the video. I don't know where my words are. But know that I'm only making half of the recipe today because I only had one sheet of puff pastry, and this recipe calls for 2. Puff pastry, by the way, comes in a box that looks like this. Pepperidge Farm isn't the only company that makes it. It's just what I happen to have in my freezer. It comes, when you open up the box, you get a paper pouch like this, and inside of it there are 2 little pieces of pastry that look like this. You find this, by the way, in the same part of the grocery store where you find pie crust. So they're right next to each other. And so what unfold it, and it's pretty much ready to work with right away. Depending on what you're using it for, and depending on how cold the freezer case is at your grocery, you may need to thaw your puff pastry. You can just set it on the counter for a half hour. It'll puff up higher if it's more at room temperature when you bake it, and it's also a lot easier to work with. What I have done is I turned on my oven to 400 degrees, and I have just a regular baking sheet that I have lined. I'm using a silicone tray liner, but if you have parchment paper or foil, that works to spray it with non-stick spray if you're going to use that. I'm going to set my puff pastry aside for just a second. And what I'm making are cinnamon brown sugar puff pastry or toaster strudels. But kind of the great part of this is that if you don't have, or like if brown sugar cinnamon isn't your jam and you like the fruit ones, you can just put a blob of whatever jam you like in the middle. Like if you like the blueberry ones or the strawberry ones, you can just put a blob of strawberry jam in the middle. Or if you like the chocolate ones, you could throw like a chocolate chips in the middle, or Nutella, or peanut butter, or whatever, little mini marshmallows. It's pretty adaptable. So I have a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. And again, I'm only making half of the recipe. 1/4 cup of brown sugar and a teaspoon of cinnamon, if you wanted to use chai seasoning or pumpkin pie spice or apple pie spice for this, that would be delicious too. And I'm just making sure that I've got my amounts correct. And then I'm using flour next. In what I'm doing, it's a half a tablespoon. If you're making a whole recipe, it'll be a whole tablespoon of flour. And what the flour is going to do in this recipe is just kind of let everything, it's for the texture of the filling so that it gets kind of like it adheres and is creamy and stuff. Well, not creamy, but like, not creamy like cream, but like, it helps it thicken. So in my flour goes, I'm gonna grab a fork and just kind of mix this all together until it's all like, you can't really see the flour anymore. It's a little dark, I realize. I don't have the lights on because it's bright in here. But that might make that a little bit easier for you to see. I could also be using my fingers to do this. Just kind of get it all mixed up so that it looks like there's not really anything but brown sugar in there. Cool. So that is done. Now on to the pastry part of the pastry. I'm going to grab my flour again, and I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of flour on my countertop because I need to roll this out a little bit with a rolling pin, which I should have gotten out before I started taping. I'll be right back. All right, we're getting creative today, South Holland. I couldn't find my rolling pin anywhere, so I grabbed a glass bottle that's sort of cylindrical in shape, and I'm going to use that as my rolling pin. I need to make my sheet of puff pastry, and if you're making a whole recipe, you'll do this to both pieces of pastry. You'll want it like 15 inches by 12 or so. I don't have to press that hard on it because it is not frozen. Just a little bit more. Just a little more. Tucker, I hear you. What's great is that this needs a rectangular shape to work, and the dough is already in a rectangular shape, so you don't have to, like, with pie crust, I can never get it to, like, be in a circle the way it's supposed to. The work is already done for you, which is kind of rad. Okay. So, the next thing I'm gonna do is use a pizza cutter to cut this into rectangles. And how big does it say? 3 by 4 inches. And I'm using a ruler because I don't trust myself. 3-inch rectangles. And if it's not like perfect, it's not that big a deal. And then by 4 inches, See, I think I cut it the wrong way, but that's all right. I'm only making half of one anyway. I think I should have done 4 this way. But that's all right. Cut it into rectangles. And put half of them on the sheet that you're going to bake them on. And if they're sticky, just put a little bit more flour on there and they'll come right up. All right. The next thing I'm gonna do is, in just a little bitty bowl, I'm gonna make an egg wash. And this is gonna end up doing 2 things. It will act as glue when we put the Pop-Tarts together, or the toaster strudels together. Like around the edges, it'll end up helping to glue the edges together, and when we brush it on the top, it'll make it nice and like brown and pretty and glossy. So I need 1 large egg, and what I'm doing today is I'm using like a liquid like egg beaters, and if you're using these, a 1/4 cup is an egg. So I'm just sort of eyeballing 1/2 of my 1/4 cup, like that. If it's not 100% like perfectly measured, it's not that big a deal. And then I need a tablespoon of milk. And again, since I'm using a half recipe, I'm only doing 1/2 of that. So 1/2 tablespoon of milk. I don't have any regular milk, I only have almond milk, so I'm using 1/2 and 1/2 for that. And since I'm using so little, like it's not that big a deal. Not that big a deal, my friends. All right, so I'm stirring it together with my brush, and brush them with the egg wash. Like I said, this is going to help everything stick together. It'll help, in this case, because we're doing the cinnamon brown sugar, it'll help everything stick to, it'll help our filling stay in place where it's supposed to. If you're doing a blob of jam or something else for your topping, it's not as big a deal. So what I'm gonna end up doing now is doing a tablespoon of filling in the center of each of my Pop-Tarts. So grabbing my tablespoon and just putting it right there in the middle. And again, if I'm doing jam, it's a tablespoon of jam. If I'm doing chocolate chips or Nutella, it's a tablespoon of chocolate chips or Nutella. If you're doing a combination of those things, like if you're doing peanut butter chocolate, as long as it's kind of an even ratio, you're good. All right. So I put that egg wash on there. Just and you can see maybe how the filling is kind of settling on top, kind of like glue. And now I'm going to do with the rest of my puff pastry is I'm going to set it on top, kind of trying to match up the general size and shape of each of my squares of pastry. going to be a little wonky donkey anyway, but that's all right. That's how you know they're homemade. So I set these on top, and then I'm just going to use a regular fork to crimp these edges together. I'm just pushing down on the sides. And this should look familiar to you if you've ever kind of eaten a Pop-Tart. This sort of crimpy edge. It's for two purposes. It's pretty, but it also smushes the crust together, and it works to seal it shut so that your filling doesn't come out and spill out during the baking. If you've ever made a pie with a pie crust and you've crimped the edges of the pie crust, like if you've made like a cherry pie or a peach pie that has a top crust, you do the same thing for the same reason. It's not like, yes, it's decorative, but it also is definitely for a purpose. My mom is going to be upset this week because I'm probably not going to have enough to share of my puff pastries. And my dad's diabetic anyway. And my husband's diabetic anyway. Should not be eating things like Pop-Tarts. But these Pop-Tarts are for Vice President Harris. They are celebratory Pop-Tarts. Alright. So I've gotten my Pop-Tarts crimped. I am going to brush the tops with the rest of the egg wash. Like I said, just to kind of make them all purty. And glossy when they come out of the oven. And the last thing I'm going to do is take a little skewer and poke a couple holes in the top of each one so that steam can escape and they don't like crack or burst or anything. You don't have to do many. You don't have to push too hard. And then these are going to go into my 400-degree oven for how long? 10 minutes. So I'll see you in 10 minutes. And in 10 minutes, as these cool, we'll make a glaze to go over the top. So I'll see you soon. Okay, so clearly our pastry is out of the oven. Obviously, I could have maybe pressed the pieces of pastry together a little bit harder so that they didn't they didn't come apart. Nothing, as you can see, has spilled out the sides. But what obviously puff pastry puffs. So they are a lot kind of fluffier than you're probably used to seeing. I'm letting these cool on the sheet, and you're going to be glad that you have parchment paper or foil down on your sheet when it comes to doing glaze for these. And the glaze that I'm doing is just easy. It's a powdered sugar glaze. The glaze on the recipe that I'm going to post is, it has cream cheese in it. We don't have cream cheese, so I'm not using it. But I've made this glaze before. It's a lot like a royal icing, if you've ever done that. This is powdered sugar, just confectioner's sugar, 2 tablespoons of that. And got a tiny whisk because I know I'm going to need it. And I'm using half and half because I don't have regular milk in equal portions. And then I'm going to throw in a splash of vanilla extract for flavor and fun. And close it up. I didn't measure the vanilla, I just put a splash in there and I poured it into the same measuring spoon, not because I was measuring 2 tablespoons of that, but what I did want to do was make sure that I didn't accidentally like pour way too much vanilla in. This is pretty soupy, so what I know I need is a little bit more powdered sugar. Not a ton. I'm just kind of doing this by eyeball now until it is the consistency that I want it to be. This isn't frosting. It's not going to look like that. It's not going to be like a cake. This is way more of a glaze. So it's going to be a lot thinner just because glazes are thinner. And the thing with glazes is that you can always build up. Like if you want that like donut glaze kind of look, you can always put multiple coats of glaze on. Like put a coat on, let it dry, put another coat on, let it dry. Okay, so now it's the consistency sort of maple syrup, which is what I want. And all I'm going to do is use my little whisk. If I had another pastry brush, I could use that too and brush it, but I'm just going to drizzle this on top of my Pop-Tarts. And I'm not doing a ton of glaze on these because I got brown sugar on the inside and I don't want to like get a new cavity. I am well and firmly ensconced in my middle age, South Holland, and I've never had a cavity in my life, and I'd like to keep it that way. So we're not going crazy with the glaze on these. No, I'm not a fanatic about my dental health. I'm just really lucky. Before you ask, I had braces, like hardcore braces, for a real long time. So I paid my dues. And there are, as I make a mess, homemade toaster strudels with brown sugar and cinnamon. I'm going to wait a little bit before I eat these so that I don't burn the bejeebies out of my mouth on the filling. If you make them, let me know what you put on the inside and tell me how they turned out. And I will see you next week for a different pastry-related but savory lunch with the librarian.